Hey everybody, I know it's been a while since I last posted a video, but I got the opportunity to make another one here, and today we're going to talk about the fuel system that I'm going to be putting in the 370Z. So to start with, we're going to go over the fuel system, the components, and then we will go ahead and start looking at the fabrication that we have to do inside the car. So let's get started. So to start with, we have our little assistant Ernie here, just checking out the durability of the fuel cell. Right here we have all the components of the fuel system that we'll be putting in the 370Z. We have our 2-liter submerged fuel pump surge tank. We have our, what is this one here? That one is going to be the lift pump. So that's a Walbro 255 external lift pump with the brackets to hold it, and then the AN fittings with the check valve so there's no back purging it. We have some fittings in here as well as the rollover vent with the little check ball in there. You'll see that. Ernie's going to help us inspect all that. And then we have our feed pump, which is going to go inside of the surge tank, the 2-liter surge tank. This is a Walbro, I think it's a this is an AEM 400 liter per hour fuel pump. I have used AEM fuel pumps for years now. Usually in the past I had the 340 liter per hour in-tank fuel pumps, and I had them in my S13, and I've pushed them all the way up to mid 400s with my RB, and we had plenty of fuel pump to go on E85. So this one should be excellent for 500 horsepower in the RB, or if we switch to a V8, we should be able to carry this one over and not have any issues there. So let's go ahead and move to the fuel cell itself. This is a bladder type fuel cell from Jazz Products. It is their 8-gallon fuel cell with a safety flap in the fill neck. We have a return, a feed, and a safety vent in the cap itself. The vent right here is built in to the cap system, and then there's also a flapper inside here just in case of rollover. I think this is our feed, and this one's our return. We have our second quality control analyst there, Henry. So there it is. That's the entire fuel system that we're going to be running in the car. I do have a fuel cooler that I'm going to hook up to this just to prolong the life of our external fuel pump, and you'll see how I do that later on. So we're going to give this a shot and see what happens. All right, got the little truck all loaded up. Oh. Let's hit the road. Alrighty, so we finally finished mounting up the fuel cell. I kind of skipped over that because it's a little boring. You guys can basically mount them up however you seem fit. Some people make an enclosure to tie around the back, and same up there. I opted to go between the strut towers here. The reason behind that is because I want to get this 8 gallons worth of fuel weight directly over the rear differential. That gives us really good weight balance, and it also prevents us from having too much weight centered in the vehicle. I know a few guys in FD that had their fuel cells in that location, and their feedback was that it basically makes the car want to pivot through the center and not really rotate around the front axles. So I went ahead and mounted it over my rear differential here. I cut a little bit out of the floor, just a little shelf to drop it down, and then we made little mounts on either side. The surge tank is going to end up mounting in the right-hand corner, and we're going to try and keep most of the little accessories that we're going to mount. We're going to try and keep them mounted to the rear or around the rear right-sided shock tower. The reasoning behind that is because it's going to offset my weight as a driver, and it also is going to reduce the amount of ballast that I'm going to have to put into this vehicle, since per the rule book, we're only allowed 50 pounds of ballast. Okay, guys, so we got the hard lines all ran, and this is basically how the fuel system is going to look in the back. This is all cut out actually right now. We're going to have a radiator that's going to sit right here, and the stock fuel tank is taken out from underneath up there. So we just have our Jazz fuel cell with the enclosure right here and the surge tank mounted off to the side. So let me go ahead and walk you through the fuel system real quick. So fuel is going to be stored inside this Jazz fuel cell. There is no foam inside of it. I would not recommend running these with foam inside of it or getting foam from anyone other than a Radium or a Nuke performance fuel cell. I think ATL has decent foam as well. 9 times out of 10, if you cheap out on foam, it is going to disintegrate with ethanol-based fuels, which is what we will be running in the RB370Z here. And it will basically mess a whole bunch of stuff up. So the fuel is going to be stored in this 8-gallon fuel cell. It has one lift pump right here, which is a Walboro 255. It will come out of this fitting right here, up through the line, pass through a 100 micron filter, and before it travels through the pump, where it will then fill the 2-liter surge tank. We have an AEM 400 liter per hour fuel pump that is in here. It's basically looks like a Bosch 044 with the fuel fitting sticking on top. I don't have it installed yet, basically because I don't want to expose it to all the shit going on over here with metal shavings everywhere before I clean everything, if it doesn't have to be exposed to that kind of environment, so I'm just leaving it in the packaging. It will then get picked up and sent to the fuel rail, where the fuel will then go through the fuel rail, come off the fuel rail. It will go to a fuel pressure regulator. That's going to be up front, mounted by the firewall. After it passes the fuel pressure regulator, it will go through the ethanol content sensor. We just used a GM ethanol sensor. That way we can, for flex fuel basically, so that we don't have to be super stringent on the ethanol that we run in this. The tables will adjust for the ethanol content accordingly. It's just a nice safety measure. I do test all the ethanol that I run in this car, or rather in this engine, but it's just a peace of mind, you know. We have the technology, might as well use it. So after it passes through the ethanol sensor, it will come back, return to the, well, actually first it'll come back, it'll go through a fuel cooler, which I think I'm going to place it underneath that top head over there. And then there'll be a fan right there, because that's where the stock hard lines are. I'm going to utilize those to travel from the front and back of the car. There'll be a fuel cooler there with a fan hooked up to it. Always put your fuel coolers on the return. Same with your ethanol content sensors. I like to put them after the fuel pressure regulator, just so there's no funny business with managing the pressure on the rail itself. So it'll pass through the fuel cooler. It will return to the surge tank here, where it will then be still in this pressurized system, and any fuel will then return from this hard line back into the main fuel cell here. This should work fairly well, especially with, even though these lines are a little bit elevated. Given that everything is pressurized, it should work fairly well. I will let you know if anything doesn't work. We do have one car here that runs the exact same setup as this. He just doesn't run the hard lines like this, he runs soft line. So I think it'll work just fine. Oh, one other thing, before the fuel actually gets to the fuel rail, it's going to pass through a 10 micron radium filter that will be up front in the engine bay, or tucked under back a little bit, maybe on the frame rail away from some of the heat. I just like to use the 100 micron here to pre-filter anything that's in the tank before it goes through the pumps, just so we don't demolish these pumps. And then you really filter it when you get up by the fuel rail, before you get to the injectors, so you don't mess up any injectors. So that's basically the run through of the fuel system in this vehicle. Everything should be super serviceable. I decided to use the hard lines to keep all the things that I'm not going to need to disconnect very often nice and clean and really durable. We're going to be running soft line from the basically from the hard lines on the car to the fuel cooler, and then from the fuel cooler to the return. And we'll also be running soft line from the feed pump, which is the AEM 400 liter per hour, to the hard line on the car, which is going to be underneath that little top hat back there. And then it'll follow the fuel rail, and everything will be nice and OEM and ethanol safe. And yeah, we should be able to keep the fuel nice and clean, keep the fuel nice and cool, and we should be good to go. So stay tuned for the next video. I've been kind of doing two things at once. So next up, we are going to be doing the rear mount radiator and the tube rear structure back here. So as you can see, I cut a good amount out, and I even cut out the sides, getting ready for those crown carbon fiberglass over fenders on the rear. So I'm super excited. Should have a good amount of airflow, and you guys are going to see me make a rear mount radiator setup with a fan shroud and an expansion tank too. So stay tuned.